Hey, Vineyard North. This is Pastor Jeff Holzclaw. I'm just checking in because we have started a new sermon series. It's called What is the Gospel? And we're kind of going back to the main thing through June 27th to August 15th. We're going to be talking about what is this thing called the gospel. And I got a couple things to share here. Um, Let me get this thing. It's kind of like I shared this on my sermon on Sunday, but a lot of times when it comes to the gospel, it can kind of be like, I think this is the right one. Yeah, here we go. It can kind of be like um, fish in the water where an old fish says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And the fish are like, "Well, what the heck is water?" And we kind of forget that a lot of times the gospel is like that. We go to church, we talk about the gospel regularly all the time, but what really is the gospel? And so we're kind of stopping and talking about that. And so today in this short video, I want to talk about two things. One is well, what is the context for this word gospel, euangelion? And then kind of how it kind of became associated with four books. We have the gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what does it mean to call those things the gospel? So the first thing is we must think about what is the Greco-Roman context for the word gospel. So this is a Greek word which was in common usage outside of the Bible. But what did it mean? Well, it actually referred to like a military victory, is that people were coming back from winning something, or people were worried that they were going to be defeated, and people would come and say, well, the good news is that we won. And so it was really a word for coming off the battlefield. It also meant the good news about a king, that Caesar had kind of ascended to the throne. And so it was kind of this imperial word, maybe propaganda or something like that, where you're saying the good news is that Caesar Augustus has ascended and he has kind of taken over the empire. And so that is the Greco Roman kind of view of these words, that the good news is something that really has like kind of like a political importance. But then there's also the Jewish kind of side of this word for good news. And it really means that Yahweh, or that Israel's God, was going to show up and do something. And you get this especially from the book of Isaiah. In Isaiah 40, Israel had been in captivity, and Isaiah was trying to encourage the people. It says in Isaiah 40, verse 9, O Zion, that's kind of a name for Jerusalem and Israel, bearer of good news, get yourself up on a high mountain. O Jerusalem, bearer of good news, or the gospel, lift up your voice with strength, lift it up, don't be afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. And so the good news is that your God has shown up. And how has he shown up? See, the Lord God will come with a strong hand. His arm shall rule for him. See, his reward is with him and his recompense before him. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arms and carry them in his bosom, and shall gently lead them, all that are young. And so this is one example of the good news that Isaiah was proclaiming to the people. We also get in Isaiah 52:7. This is a very familiar or famous passage. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. So again, this is the idea that the person with good news will be coming from a great distance, like a military victory, and he's proclaiming peace. We haven't been destroyed by our enemies, but God has brought peace again. So how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who bring good news, who proclaims peace, who brings good news of happiness and proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. And so, again, this comes from the book of Isaiah. And I just want to do one last one to kind of get context for this idea of good news. And this is should be very familiar also, because Jesus kind of read this. In Luke 4, we're told that he opened up the scroll. And what does it say? It says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, or to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim victory to the captives, and the opening of the prisons to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God, and to comfort all who mourns. So that's Isaiah 60. So in Isaiah 40, Isaiah 52, and Isaiah 61, we get these different images of the gospel. And so in the New Testament, when it comes to the gospel, we have both this idea that there's this military victory, and that there's also this idea that God is coming to reign. Now, the really interesting thing, this is where it's really neat. I'm going to pull up one more thing, is the book of Mark, what we call the Gospel of Mark. How does it start off? Well, it starts off like this. It says, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, what's he saying there? Well, there's a couple things in that just that one sentence. Is the author Mark is using this word, the good news, to speak about who? Well, he's not speaking about a plan of salvation, not so much, or even the process of salvation. What is it? What does he say? Is he connects it to the person of Jesus? This is the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. And who is Jesus Christ? Well, he's a human being, but he's also what? He's the Son of God. And then we get these quotations from the prophet Isaiah, which pull from the passages that we just looked at. And so Mark is starting his gospel by referring back to the prophet Isaiah and the announcement of the good news. But back then, that was just the good news that God was going to restore the people from exile because they had been enslaved by Babylon and Assyria, and that God was going to save them. But now we get this other announcement of good news that God is on the move again, and that Jesus is kind of the focus of this good news. And because of Mark's gospel, that's actually why we ended up getting, that's why we call the Gospels, is because he started off by calling it the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. And then the other gospels that we have, they don't actually start that way. Matthew starts with a genealogy, and Luke starts by talking about how he gathered up all this information. And John he starts about kind of the cosmic beginning of all things, that in the beginning was the word. But Mark is the one that starts off by saying the gospel. And so later, this idea that the gospels, these stories, not just stories, but these histories, these biographies of Jesus, are really focused on the person, and that all of that is the good news. And so we're going through different sermons to speak about what is the good news, and we're talking about how it's Jesus. How the good news can be expanded to 3 words, which is like Jesus is Lord. And so we'll be talking about that even more as we go on. But that's some of the background for what the gospel means. And so we hope that you come to our worship services too. If you aren't already, you can watch them online. We're gathering in person. You can also find this series and our services online. Vineyard North .com/live is where you can find all that stuff. So we hope to see you in person or online as we continue through this series.